I thought when you're a student teaching that you're being paid to student teach. I didn't know that you pay to student teach. That doesn't make any sense to
Yeah.
me. So what's
You
the
pay to
truth even
work.
about
You pay to
residencies? Tell me
play, you
this.
pay to work.
That's ridiculous. It's the most
It is.
ridiculous,
It
dumb
is.
thing I've ever heard in my life. You pay to teach. First of all, let's just back all the way up because this is just Chris Stewart speaking. If you want to be a teacher in the United States, that should be free no matter what. If we want on a real level, we should just say all education should be free because a dumb country is a dumb country and a dumb country will die. It is Freedom Friday and you are still not free. This is another episode of Freedom Friday. It is Friday and you are still not free, but hopefully you will be freer after this hour with Ish and me. Our good brother Sharif El-Mekki is not with us right now. He might be joining us later, and it will be good if he does because today's topic is the truth about teachers and the truth about teaching. There's a lot of lies and myths out there about what teaching is and what a teacher is. And it's good sometimes to talk to an actual teacher like we have on this program about some of the inside scoop on what's going on with teachers. It was just recently told to me that teaching is the largest workforce in the United States. And I did not know this. So teachers are there are 3.5 million full-time and part-time traditional public school teachers, 251,000 public charter school teachers, and 466,000 private school teachers. That is a lot of people when you put it all together. I think it's 3.3 million for public schools in terms of teachers. The conversation and the discourse about teaching and teachers is a lot about the pay. It's a lot about, are we paying teachers enough? Which is great, but that's not really about teaching. That's not really about the experience you have as a teacher. That's not really about the challenges, how tough it is, how easy it is. Sharif, who is one of our strong voices on this show, is actually working on making sure that there is a pipeline of African-American men teaching, because right now there's only 2%. They only make up 2% of teachers. But I always say back to him, we're going to bring people into a profession, but we better tell them the truth about what the profession is like so that they don't get there and realize that they're in a highly feminized occupation with a lot of challenges that we need to be honest with people about. So anyways, let's start there. Ish, when you think about your career trajectory as an educator, what has changed for you over time from when you were new to the game to the point where you felt like you had some mastery over teaching to now?
Well, I always say it takes about 3 to 5 years to even start to get a semblance of like, okay, let me think about how I'm teaching, right? So at first it was just a blur, right? You're just trying to like survive somewhat. You're trying to like be as humanizing of an element for your students within the classroom, right? But as you start to really go and grow and have experience, you start to be like, oh, wait a minute, what I did last year really smacked, or what I did last year flopped. So I need to go back to the drawing board. I need to rethink and reconfigure. And then, oh, wait a minute, I should ask my students what they thought. Oh, wait a minute, we should actually work together and co-design some of the ideas that we'll be discussing during the year. And so that progression within itself actually just makes you a better person overall. And not just in the school itself, but also in your personal life, also out in the world. So you're able to like master the ability to talk to diverse audiences about complex ideas. That's a transferable skill. So when I saw for my own trajectory was not only being able to kind of practice these kind of concepts and discussions within a classroom, but that translated into kind of the outside world and then like ushered me into kind of a teacher activist role where not only was I advocating for my students outside of school, but then I was also able to use the skills I learned in order to talk to other people about what the importance of education is and even teach other teachers how to approach it, because there is no playbook for real, for real. There's different suggestions, there's different ideas, but at the end of the day, folks aren't really necessarily given a playbook. And if they are, I can tell you right now, it isn't really owned by them and it falls flat. And so when we talk about the difficulty of education, it's kind of what Stokely Carmichael said, or Kwame Ture, about them going down south and organizing sharecroppers to vote. He's like, when we went in there, we were kids. And when we came out, we were totally changed, different people. And that's what my trajectory felt like as an educator for over a decade within the classroom. That process of really like learning and negotiating these spaces while also learning how to speak truth to power.
What year in your teaching did you think I got this? Like, I know what I'm doing.
Well, I kind of felt like that from jump. Not because I did, not because I did,
Right.
but because I came in there and
Yeah.
the students told me that. They're like, these
Yeah.
other
Okay.
teachers aren't teaching us these things. And I was like, oh, really? And so like even that process of learning that, I think we take for granted sometimes what folks are coming into. And also we take for granted what students are actually bringing into the class. I
Mm-hmm.
remember
Mm-hmm.
it was my third year teaching, and I put a quote up on the board. It was like, your teachers can't save you because they're puppets too. And then the student, halfway through the year, because I kept it up there for a while, looked at me. He's like, Jimenez, I know what you're trying to say. I understand what point you're trying to get across. He's like, but that John's a little demoralizing.
Oh, that's messed up. Your teachers are puppets too. Oh, I'm surprised you didn't get fired, Ish. You said that it could take you a few years or a couple of years for a lot of people to even think that they're teaching well or whatever. But let's start at the beginning. What's the truth about the preparation for teaching before you got there? For how prepared you were on day one, and not just you, but when you look at some of your colleagues and others, what's the truth about the prep before you get there?
It doesn't really prepare you.
It's called prep, but it's not prep.
It really doesn't prepare you. It's a lot of theoretical. It's a lot of more of about the science of it rather than the art of teaching. I also think that I came into it later. I was 28 when I started in the classroom. So I had experience in the real world, walking to work for over a couple miles, to work in a transitional housing, childcare with children and mothers. So when I became a teacher, I was like, wow, this is easy when it came to the workday, right? But then the actual process within itself from my teacher preparation programs, I walked in already knowing that it was not preparing me. And I was also aware that the children weren't getting what they needed in the schools, too many schools, but specifically the schools I wanted to teach at. So I was very clear as soon as I entered it, like I wanted to teach African American history. School District of Philadelphia requires it. I want to teach at a hyperly racially isolated school in the neighborhood that I once lived in. So when I stepped in, it was just kind of like eyes open. And that allowed me to really like learn from my students. And also another thing that helped me was the professional space that the leadership at the school provided me when they saw the relationship building that I had with students. And that is also, like, people say it all the time, like relationships are so important, da, da, da. But there's something to really speak to kind of the interpersonal kind of interactions that you have with students in an authentic way. So the realer you are with them about who you are and the vulnerability that you allow them to see, the more they are too in the same type of vein. And just like Paulo Freire, I believe it's a two-way street. So through those conversations, through that, that's what prepared me ultimately to become a good teacher. At first, I was just like a mediocre teacher that, you know what I mean, like the students liked and had a relationship with and did learn some things. But to really take it to that next level, that takes years of just practicing and going back to the drawing board, curating your content, having ownership over what you're presenting, and also being able to deal with the students and the various different types of personalities that you deal with. Because there's a lot of different types of people, right? And the teacher has to deal
Yeah.
with almost all of them.
Is that one of the things that you don't learn in prep? Is that what it's going to be like with real human students who are different, very different from each other, or have different needs? I mean, is that and could you teach that? Like, how could you be prepared for that until you do it?
Well, again, and I side hustle in teacher preparation programs for like the last couple, like 6 years, right? I think that it's important that folks walk in with eyes wide open, right? That it is difficult. Like all the romanticization about teaching is true. Like when I watch Abbott Elementary, I tear up because it reminds me of memories. But then at the same time, it's like you need to be honest. Like, have you looked at your base self? Like, you have to be very clear about who you are before you walk into that classroom, and understand that you're going to have a lot of growing to do once you do. So one thing I know that I emphasize with the pre-service teachers that I teach is that, yo, what you're dealing with is no joke. It's so important. Yet at the same time, understand these inequitable systems and structures, and then your own positionality within those systems and structures. And that, be very careful not to reinforce structures of oppression. Be real careful not to just be about compliance and obedience and not about the actual education of the child. And be critical of your own processes as you're going through that journey. And I think that that's not emphasized enough. We're not giving the students the tools necessary to even be in that type of reflective process in an authentic way. And people walk in thinking, oh, I'm going to save the world. And it's like, yo, what are you going to do about this child running around the thing calling all the kids MFers in second grade? You know what I mean? Like, are you going to scream at that child? You're going to, it's
Yes.
a very difficult thing.
Yes,
But like,
I am.
but that's what I'm saying. It's
I'm going to
hard.
scream at him. Yeah, I can imagine being somewhat of a fragile person, right? Who's been, oftentimes you're a person who did well in school yourself. Oftentimes you want to teach because you love education and you love teaching because you had a good experience. Your personal makeup, I mean, let's be real, the majority of teachers who are going to teacher prep programs are white women. Definitely college educated, mostly middle class. And of the ones that are not white, because let's be real about this, the people of color actually are also mostly middle class and college educated, because you have to be college educated, period, to teach for the most part. And if you think about that, if you think about the number of us that have a college education and the number of us that have one in education, that's an elite small group of people, right? Like, if you are in that class of people, you're not like everybody. You're probably successful in schooling in some way. And then you get into class with young people who don't see schooling the same way everybody else does, because it has not been a Disney experience for them. Like, oh, all this romance about, you watch the teacher stuff and, everybody tears up on something with the teacher and the student. That hasn't been their life. So what do you do? Now all of a sudden you're all fragile in the classroom in the front. You got a kid calling you an MFer, and you got kids roasting you every day, right? Like, I don't take roasting well, right? I do not take
most people, wait a minute, but most people who do a lot of roasting can't take roasting well. That's so the irony of it. It's like just dripping. You know what I mean?
No, I don't do roasting. This is why I want to teach the kindergartners, because that high school roasting process, that would not work for me. I don't know how y'all keep your self-esteem up in high school
they're
teaching.
funny. I mean, they're funny. You know what I mean?
They're not funny. That is self-esteem defeating type of behavior on their part.
No, you definitely
Sharif,
gotta have thick skin. Yeah.
Welcome, brother. Welcome to the show. Glad you could join. We are in the middle right now of talking about the truth about teachers and teaching, and right now we were just talking about the prep part, just the prep part, like the truth about the preparation part. And Ish just gave us his answer on what he sees it as, and his main thing is the prep doesn't prepare you. So the prep isn't really prep. What do you think is something, if you were not in this work, that that you would need to know? Like, what's the truth about teacher preparation?
Yeah, I think Ish hit it. I mean, and it's not just like opinion. This is something that we hear from educators. They say, "Hey, you know what? I just spent 4 or 5 years in a teacher prep program to get certified. Now I'm in front of students. I'm not prepared." And then they say, when if they're black and brown kids, or if they don't share my cultural background or experience, then I'm really unprepared. And so that number goes from, like 60% of like, I'm not ready, to like 70-80% I'm not ready. And, it's a variety of reasons. There's some, and we see some positive changes, like, making sure that teacher residencies are happening. So it's this year long kind of, you're with a master teacher, but also being paid, instead of the unpaid 6-week student teaching experience that you might get the second semester of your senior year. So imagine you're taking all these theoretical courses, and then you get to your senior year, the second semester, you're in a classroom, and just for 6 weeks. And so the first 3 weeks, you're probably not doing much. You're trying to learn names and and responsibilities, and you're practicing, a little bit maybe with small groups. And then the last 3 weeks you actually teach. So about 15 days, but in a lot of schools, there ain't a lot of teaching happening on Mondays and Fridays, right? So you got, even less. You got maybe 9 days. And it's like, all right, you graduate now. Often not getting real feedback, not getting real practice, not getting enough at bats, all those kind of things. And you've been paying some significant amount of money for very little practice and unpreparedness. And, Temple University did a study of Pennsylvania ed prep programs, and they said, and folks are saying that they're not ready. So I would say that's a big part. We do see some improvement. We do see some spaces that are really trying to take it seriously. And this was always one of the things, and you and I talked about this, Chris. Everybody, maybe 5, 6 years ago, decade ago, everybody was talking about Finland, Finland, Finland. We need to be like Finland. I'm like, yeah, well, go look at what they did with their ed prep programs, and then let's talk about Finland, because I'm all for it. Like, let's do that.
For the record, for most people listening, for the record, Finland shut down all of its teacher prep programs, all of them. They had too many of them. And in the United States, if you stay up late one night in the middle of the night and you search teacher preparation, there's a range of things that will be offered to you, from some virtual online kind of testing meals, or not test meals, like certificate meals where they just produce whatever, all the way down to expensive programs that really do a lot of the pedagogical stuff and whatever,
and the expensive programs who don't, you know what I mean?
Actually, you know what? I think people don't know this, but like University of Phoenix, for instance, is one of the most expensive colleges in the world. Like, people don't know this.
I did not know that.
Yeah,
I thought it was cheaper.
No,
I just
University
assumed.
of Phoenix
I never
is
saw
very
any,
expensive.
Wow.
It's very expensive, as a matter of fact, and they prey upon people's desire to want to move up in the world and whatever, but it costs. You pay for it, and I don't think this is new for anybody who's been watching this show for a while. The truth about teacher preparation is that it's insufficient. That it's not good. It actually does not prepare you to teach, and I don't understand where the gap is. Sharif, you said a little bit about there being some residencies, which gets people some real world experience before. What's the truth about residencies? Because there's one truth that I, as a layperson, didn't know before someone told me about the residency. I thought when you're a student teaching that you're being paid to student teach. I didn't know that you pay to student teach. That doesn't make any sense to me. So what's the truth even about residencies? Tell me this.
You pay to work.
That's ridiculous. It's the most ridiculous, dumb thing I've ever heard in my life. You pay to teach. First of all, let's just back all the way up, because this is just Chris Stewart speaking. If you want to be a teacher in the United States, that should be free no matter what. If we want on a real level, we should just say all education should be free, because a dumb country is a dumb country, and a dumb country will die. And we are dying right now. We have a terminal case of moron right now. So education should be the one thing that is free above everything else. I don't even care about food, shelter, housing, any of that stuff. If you're going to learn, I'm wrong about that. You got to eat. Okay, you got to eat, you got to drink. So clean water, all that stuff too. But then you should get an education, and it should be free. But if we're not going to give everybody education, for sure, certain people should not have to pay. You should not have to pay to become a teacher in the United States, especially a public school teacher. That should be fully paid. But anyways, that's just my soapbox. Getting back to the residency part.
That's a real important soapbox. And, interesting enough, I used to think that just reparations for Black folks, the first part should be free ed all the way through. But then I started thinking, what, even if we're well educated, and like Black women are like most educated group, I read a couple places, but if we're well educated and we're just around a bunch of racist morons, that ain't helpful. You know what I mean? So it's like, that can't, that can't exist either. So I'm like, we need an educated citizenry all across. But like you said, particularly for educators and the student teaching that you talked about, there's some shout out to Senator Hughes, who really helped champion this in Pennsylvania for folks to for student teachers to be paid, at least a stipend. And they're trying to. There are a lot of advocates, including Teach Plus PA and the Center for Black Educator Development, and a bunch of other folks were also continuing to advocate for even more because and I forget the exact number, but whatever they thought as far as student teachers, like who would there was enough money for maybe a couple hundred folks, and it was like 1,000 people applied for it. So this was like a much higher demand than was originally budgeted for. So we're hoping the governor Shapiro increases that significantly moving forward in these budgets. But
So what are some of the other truths about residency? I mean, one is the money. What are some of the other truths about if someone were going to go into residency program to learn to teach, what should they know?
Yeah. So what they should know is that it's not, this is like a real job, and you're in school. So, it's not like you're in a residency and, it's like you should take it seriously because you are like actually in front of students. What I'm hoping, and I do believe that this people are intentional about it, at least the residencies that I know about, making sure that their mentor teacher is very strong. Like I think that's important that they are coached because sometimes people think like, oh, you're great with kids, so that means you're great with teaching adults. That's not the case, right? And so I'm hoping that residencies are really intentional and that there's a process of like, okay, not only how am I selecting the mentor, but that there's ongoing collaboration. Because sometimes like I remember when I would get a student teacher, you get a letter from the university, hey, would you accept this? You sign it, the principal sign it, and then that's it. Then the professor will come and observe a couple times. But if I was designing it, I would have that as an ongoing. So there's a partnership. You're going to kind of not necessarily take a class together, but we should actually be meeting together. A university, host teacher, and student teacher, right? Because as a host teacher, I should also know like what are they learning during this time frame, and you should also know what my, not only just the curriculum is, but also what my, pedagogical framework is as well, right? Like, and so all of that, I believe is just an important part of creating an ecosystem, for it. Some places the
Yeah.
residents get paid less than a teacher. Some places they get paid fully. So it's also important to take a look at that. They get
They should be
like a
paid
first year
fully.
salary. Yeah, but there are some places that they don't, so people should really take a look at that. Like, okay, what does the residency mean? Some places, I think where they're paid fully, they're part of the union, and so then they're allotted
Woo,
a per
woo,
share,
organize. Woo, got to organize.
a per share
Got to
teaching salary.
organize. Don't you
Yeah.
be hating on organization. So
And then there's some universities who are just throwing residencies in their program because they're like, "Oh, is this what the new thing
it's
is?
a
All right,
thing to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're labeling like you weren't interested in residencies for years, even though it's always been a thing that should have occurred. And there are some universities who are just Johnny come lately. Oh, here's another way to make a little funds, so we're going to add this to our portfolio.
Well, you
But
got to have it in your materials that you do that, like that a
right,
residency is there. All right.
which
Well,
is a
let's move
shame.
on a little bit because um, this is a big topic, I think. What's the truth about classroom management? I hear a lot about the failures of being able to manage classrooms, and it's not for everybody. And a lot of people, this is one of the places where a lot of teachers might fall down, like on the job, like they just don't have control of their classrooms. Now, I don't know enough about this to say that I'm an expert or anything like that, but I have seen classrooms that look like they're out of control. And when I ask certain other educators about those classrooms, they're like, yeah, that doesn't happen in my classroom, right? So what's the truth about classroom management?
Go ahead, Ish.
I mean, it's a combination of several things, right? The positionality of the instructor in relation to how the class is, how they even view the idea of what discipline is or consequences are in the classroom. I think that there's a misunderstanding when they have like classroom management professional developments every single year. And folks are like trying to say, here, use this cookie cutter mold to do this in your class, and don't emphasize the importance of kind of the teacher having ownership of how they are constructing and organizing their class. Now, that does not mean a free fall, right? That means a very thought out plan about what and how you're operating your classroom. And I think that also teacher preparation for the class is also a big piece. A lot of folks don't prepare enough about what they're teaching their students and leave too much space for kind of idle minds and idle hands. Instead of having a full, robust program with stuff in their back pocket that they can rip out if the lesson goes sideways or if it falls flat and time runs, you still have a lot of time left. Another thing is, I think we need to reconfigure how we're even thinking about it. I love when I first started teaching, they had Dr. Harry Wong speak, right? And he has his First Days of School book.
Oh,
and
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, one of it, and he recently passed too.
Yeah.
One of the things he emphasized, he's like, I keep a pristine classroom. He's like, just like in the grocery store, you want to have signs where you need to go. You're not asking questions about necessarily unless you just can't find it, right? But the clearer you are with those policies and procedures, the more you practice it, the more your classroom is reflective of that, right? Like I used to hate paper being on my floor in between classes or even like pencil sharpening because it had to look like, you're walking into some place that is respected. And by turn, students respect that too. Also, I was big on like not having corners accessible to students.
Not corners, what do you mean?
So like putting like a bookcase in the corner, putting a thing in the corner. So it's not like the students can like metaphorically or symbolically separate themselves from the community of the classroom necessarily, unless they need to.
You ain't make kids stand in a corner, face the corner, like
he did, and he put a cone on their head, and he put the dummy cone on their head. So that part right there. Tell me more about layout of the classroom, like intentionality.
I don't know
the layout of the classroom.
You've ever seen. I used to always like at the beginning of the year take pictures of my classroom because I was so proud of them. But you walk in and you walk into an experience, right? The students feel good walking into your room. They want to know what's going on. I would, in between classes, play like loud hip hop music. So even like students who I didn't know, like stick their head in, like, what's going on in here? And it builds that kind of sense that this is a special place. And that special place is respected. And also, again, I need to emphasize this, clean and organized, which I'm a huge advocate for. Like your desks don't need to be, but that classroom needs to be. And so when they walk in, they feel that energy and they replicate it, quite frankly, and they respect the space. Like if you see them doing something and you just got to check them right there and be like, yo, you got to respect this space, man. And most students, like if you get them and you're consistent and it's always there, after a while, it doesn't happen anymore. And I think another thing, again, just to go back, is relationships. Students can smell blood in the water. If you are fake, if you trying to be something you ain't, you trying to be like, I ain't smile until November, and you was happy-go-lucky type of person, they gonna eat you alive.
Or if you come in trying to be the hip hop person.
Exactly. And you
never
not
really
hip hop,
and you country, and you trying to do hip hop.
If you've only, like in Philadelphia, if you only been saying John for like the last month because you're preparing yourself to teach your students, that's problematic.
Now, see, for people listening and watching who may not know what John is.
If you only watch Abbott Elementary, that's the only way that you can relate to the Philly.
I used to hear Sharif say this John or that John all the time. So for people listening who don't live in Philly and don't know what this is, a John is a jumbo prawn. It's a very big shrimp, and it's a shrimp the size of an octopus. That's why they call it a John. It's a jumbo prawn. It's the size of an octopus, and you eat it like a steak, and you grill it like a steak. So when they say this
Philly
John,
don't even know what a prawn is, so let alone a jumbo prawn. You know what I mean?
That's a jumbo prawn. All right. Well, listen. So two things. I want to move on to the next one. I think is really important for people to know, like the truth about it. But before we get there, to this last thing, I just want to say, I can't remember what year it was with one of my kids that the parents could go through different classrooms and then they could rank the teachers that they wanted the most. And then they would try and match your student to that teacher's classroom. And I can remember one year that we went in, and I think we may have went through 3 or 4. All the parents picked one of the teachers as their top, just on interactions and sight and coming in. right? Just by walking through the classroom and whatnot. And one of the teachers was one of the least selected classrooms. And of course, what happened after that is they put all the Somali kids into that classroom, the least selected classroom. But I remember saying to my wife when we walked through there, this looks like my kids are going to be bored and they're going to hate life in this classroom. I didn't know anything about classroom design. I didn't know anything about where you put stuff. I just know that in another one, it had all these like little sections and nooks and colors and whatever. And here's another piece of my commentary on this. Having been in some of those schools that I really used to support a lot that did things like slant, and I used to like really support the slant stuff. And for people listening, I don't know what slant stands for, but it basically means stand at a goddamn attention all through class. Like keep your eyes on me, track me, you're tracking. If you're looking away, you get a demerit. You stand straight. So slant, I think, listen, somebody correct me in the public, but slant was a thing about how you have to be in the classroom. You have to sit, you have to track, you have to keep your eyes on the teacher, you have to respond when spoken to and all this stuff. But that's totally different than the feel that we got in this classroom that all the parents were picking. So I just want to say, we may not know everything about education, but parents walking through your classroom, we do know we know vibes, we know a feeling, and we know for a fact that when you had a bunch of parents who didn't talk to each other, all picking the same couple of teachers and not picking another one, there was something to the feeling there. But anyways, let me move on because I feel like there's so much truth to tell about teaching and I want to get to all the explosive ones. But the next one is tell me the truth about dealing with administrators. When you are a teacher, tell me the truth about your relationship with administrators and the good and the bad. And Sharif, you were an administrator, so you don't get to answer because you're just gonna be answering from.
Before that, I was a teacher, but
okay,
I do think
right.
I had a skewed experience. I was naive. Like my principals as a teacher, I only had one principal. No, I had for most of my teaching, I had one principal for the first 8 years, and then the last couple I had someone else, but I transitioned during that time to assistant principal, but I was still teaching. So most of it was one principal, and I had a fantastic. I mean, I still when I go to South Carolina, I go look up Mr. Delfonso. We go to dinner, like you know what I mean. Like he was, I mean, he was a great person to have as your, as a leader.
Why?
That
Why
kind of
was he a
support.
great? Because someone somewhere else is not having a great experience. So
Oh yeah, and
what made
I
him
would
great?
learn that when I would go. I mean, what made him one, he was a teacher in that school. And I didn't realize that when I first met him, but he was actually a teacher in the school, then a teacher leader, and then he applied to be the principal, after a long-term principal had been there. So one, there was this longevity, connectivity, knowing the community, knowing the staff even, and I can imagine part of his challenge, which is what I learned later is like, okay, now you're administrator for your homies and your friends, that you were, before. But from all accounts, former students and friends of mine who actually I learned, well, oh yeah, he was my history teacher. They strong instructional, strong classroom, strong, just that kind of thing. But he cared deeply for the community. He looked at this as wins, like how do we win? How do we ensure? How do we have great program, great instruction, great teachers? He had stability in the building. And not to say like everybody got along with him all the time, you know what I mean? Like, I know there was some, definitely some clashes and conflicts and things, but and I think it was, when I would hear about the issues, I could understand like where folks were coming from on both ends. But I would say the biggest part was for me was like the support, the mentorship, and the sponsorship that he provided, to
Mm-hmm.
me and others, right? And so I just felt like for a new teacher, a career changer, so to speak, in this building, he was that type of leader that I just really I felt poured into me in a lot of different ways, pushed me, challenged me. And
Mm-hmm.
just real quickly, like, he was the one. We were at a professional development one time at a training, and I remember, and I had this thing for a long time, and I wish I would have did a better job of preserving it during the move. He wrote on a napkin like, "Sharif, you're going to be a great principal one day." And I
Mm-hmm.
held that for years, and then during the subsequent moves, I lost it. And I told him, I was like, I don't want to be a principal. Like, and he would every once in a while, like, yo, you should be a school leader one day. You really need to think about it. And I would be leaving my school. Like, he'd be in the office working. And I'm like, I'm leaving. You're still here? No, thank you. I don't want that kind of, that kind of life, but Cheney University was partnering with the school district to have, to do folks to get their principal certification and their math, um, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. He was like, oh, you should go, put the flyer. Back then we put your mail would go in the mailbox, a little cubby hole in the teacher's office, the mail room. And then he wrote a note, oh, you should attend this. And, he saw me, he was like, oh, make sure you go, blah, blah, blah. I didn't go. Next day, he's like, hey, did you go to the thing? I was like, no, I couldn't. I was tutoring my students. And so it was an easy excuse for me not to go to this principal meeting because I had students. He's like, well, they have another one next week. So, try to go and I had no intention of going because I didn't want to be a principal. But that next week, I think it was a Thursday, I'm with students. I wasn't lying about students. I had my students. I'm in there. This man comes up with pizza and says, Sharif, I want to cover this time. I want you to go to that meeting. That's not like sponsorship.
Yeah,
for him to be that deliberate and thoughtful. It's one thing to tell people, oh, you should do. It's another thing. Like Sharif is going to be up there. He's going to be with these students, and he's going to, and this is going to be, and I'm doing a good thing, right? It's not like I'm just like chilling. He comes up, covers the class, and again, this was like just an after school, program that I had with youth. He came to cover it, and so then I felt compelled, so I went. Years later, I became a principal, right? And so, that's what I mean.
Wow.
That was that. So that's just one example. But when we wanted to do something, I said, hey, these aren't the right books. Can we order these? He said, yes. I'm like, hey, you know what? We're studying, the students have this project. And Kathy Lee was like just instrumental in all of this. It was just like, hey, you know what? We're studying the impact of tobacco in the Black community. Can we take students to Virginia and see a tobacco farm and so they can really understand, here's everything they're going to be reading and doing. It says yes, right? And so, it was a lot of yeses. And I know another principal who, for example, the teacher got a grant, $5,000 to do some robotics or something, as a science teacher. And the principal was like, well, you didn't ask me before you applied, so send it back.
Wow. Okay. So
those are the kind of stories I was getting versus the experience I had with Mr. Chuck Delfonso.
I do want to talk about that. If you're an educator and you're listening to this right now and you're not having a good experience with your administrator, what is it that the public needs to know about that? Because, now we know what good looks like. What does bad look like? Like, what type of experience is a teacher having when they're having kind of usual problems with an administrator? What is that?
Well, just let me add this one thing, Ish. I didn't realize how many principals weren't effective teachers. I was shocked to learn that. I came in naive, man. I was like 21. I just think oh, you're a principal. That means you were like one of the best teachers in the building.
No.
Yo, bro.
No.
If you were a teacher
folks, at all.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I ran the gambit, right? So my first principal, Margaret Mullen, at Germantown before it closed, she saw what I was doing with the students. Like I said, supportive. Like I had no issues really. You know what I mean? She had my back. I felt supported. And that was very beneficial for me in my first 4 years of teaching, right? It felt like I can learn and I had the space to grow. When I got laid off and then rehired again, I lucked out. The person that brought me in is Debbie Carrera, who's now head of the education for the city and under Mayor Parker in Philadelphia. And she saw that I was doing a great job, even though I felt like I was drowning. And she's like, no, you'll be good here. Da, da, da. And she retained me because I was on special assignments since I was laid off. And then she actually then got elevated. That's something that I know she was holding off for a little bit. And then we got new principals. And that's kind of at that point, I started having the questionable experiences with dealing with administrators. So for one point, I was definitely respected and held in high regard because year 5, you're an OG in some schools nowadays when it comes to like being there the longest, knowing what to do, that type of thing, knowing how things operated. And so the person that came in, at first was like stayed in their office. You didn't see them in the hallway. When you did see them in the hallway, it was because other visitors were coming and they were trying to maintain image. So like when you have an administrator more concerned with image than substance, I believe you start to kind of see this like game being played where they like it when it's all good and like you making them look good, but they'll kind of hold you back if they feel like it doesn't fit into what they think could potentially get them in trouble or that could potentially get the school unneeded due attention, right? Not in the benefit for the children, but for the benefit of their career. And then I've had situations where I had a field trip that I took my students to every single year, Minority Law Day, with Black lawyers, Black and brown lawyers. And one year, it was just like, no, you can't. I'm like, what do you mean I can't? And it became that type of situation where it was just like, you can't do it because they don't have insurance, or you can't, and then start throwing out all these type of barriers. And then I would find out the barrier wasn't true. I was finding out that we were making up rules as they went along. And then finally, I just said, okay, I'm just going to email above you and find out why I can't take my students to a field trip that we've been going to the last couple of years that is already like other schools are attending throughout the school district. And then the next day, I got a notification that they would be going. And then the next day after that, I received a letter about me getting written up and investigated and have to talk to labor relations and all these folks, and I needed representation. So there's retribution that some folks also engage in if they don't like the way you move or if they feel like you're too big for your own good. And instead of supporting and having the experience Sharif had, I started having the experience of like, why are these folks like trying to stop what's good for the children? And that just really upsetted me and made me more. So when I received that write-up letter, I made a copy and put it on front of my school, my classroom door, and have a discussion. Sharif smiling, you know I did this. And have a discussion with everybody and their mama about what happened and why I'm getting written up and why it's not fair. And that also translated to the last principal I had, which was during COVID, and refused to meet, refused to discuss. And then when things got pushed back, I also then got written up again. And I had to go through those processes. So many teachers don't have that type of confidence in their own educational abilities because they haven't never had a principal like I had my first 4 years or like Sharif had, right? But the ones that do, it's like, yo, man, like I know I know what I'm doing is good for the children, and I know you don't even really know what you're doing. and it's just like that. Like, and even at one point, there was a point where I had like 4 teachers in one school year. 4 principals in one school year. And yeah, and it's just like, wow, this is so temporary, so unstable. And it was so unique compared to what I was experienced my first 4 years with a stable principal who had a vision that brought in some of the best educators that I'm still friends with. And then that school got closed. Everybody got like laid off and dispersed. And then this new school, I'm finding out like it's just a much more grinding type of situation where folks aren't really there long enough to even establish any type of real team, community. And then if you have a mediocre person at top, that person's more concerned with what they are doing than what's best for the children. And so there's a lot of that going on and a lot of retribution for folks who push back.
Yeah, I mean, just a couple of quick reactions, Chris, before you jump in. One, yeah, when you were like hanging up the thing, I do remember that. But I would also chuckle, not only because you were doing that, making it a conversation piece, but that was also what I used to do when I would get campus police. I had a whole like probably 20, 30 write-ups. And so I would plaster them all outside of my dorm room till I ended up having to do off campus. So that's one thing. The second piece, that principal instability piece is real. And so while you had that stability the first 4 years, that's the superintendents as well as principals. That's not always what people experience in what school communities. And even my first role as a principal, I was the 3rd principal in 6 months. Somebody retired in June. So the next person quit in December, and then here I come, so that's like, even just imagine like just the volatility of the role, culture, community, communications, all those kind of things. And then the third part is a little bit more, deeper. While you kind of knew there are also a lot of teachers who don't know, who think they know better than people who are leading the school. Just like I mean, I had people like there. I'm like, you're 1 month in, you're still like intellectually not fully developed, and you've never taught this in this community, but yet you know all of the things, right? And so there's also a balance of people having a level of humility to be able to accept and receive feedback, and I think that's a big part of school leadership. That is also, if you can look at teachers as also leaders, right? Because they're leading classrooms. And then if you can have a feedback loop that's of respect, where give and take, that's the kind of culture and communication and cooperation that you want. Because I've also seen like arrogance with new folks, like, oh yeah, I know, like, no, that's not a good idea. That's actually not good instruction. That's actually not yielding results. You know what I mean? But like, well, I know, and none of that matters. Like, no, it actually does matter, right? Like, so I remember also having to sometimes, not a lot, but sometimes having to check people who brought a level of hubris just because they're like, and that's why I get nervous sometimes online. We're like, leave us alone. Don't tell us. We know everything. Like, but you don't. Like, you actually don't. And families and kids are actually saying, some of their response is saying, like, no, you don't know how to teach us. You know what I mean? So I would just add that nuance and clearly the dope teachers and educators, like that
They know
partnership
what they
and
don't know.
collaboration. Yeah.
That's one of the things, you know what you don't know.
That's part
You
of
know,
wisdom, right? We're
yeah.
like, hey, I don't know this.
I think it's going to become more of a problem now because we're starting to see multi-generational teaching staff. Meaning now your oldest teacher in a building, sometimes the distance between that teacher and the
But that should
Gen
be a beautiful
Z-ish,
thing.
it should be, except for I think it's going to bring in a little bit some challenging values. First of all, younger people are starting to challenge everything. So they come into a structure, they've been there 5 minutes and they're like, well, I think we need to have a committee meeting because I've been here 5 minutes and it's not running the way that I think it should run.
And I need to be the principal, actually. You know what I mean?
I should be the principal. Like, I think this age discrimination thing where you guys are all on top and you make all the, so I foresee some things coming. So I just want to say one quick thing, and I do want to move on to another piece of this truth about, because we keep talking about the truth about teaching. First of all, when I became a school board member, I had an outgoing school board member say to me, do school visits and don't ever tell them when you're coming. Just show up. And I didn't know what that advice meant, but I did it. And what was funny about it is when you call ahead, when you tell a principal that you're coming, when you call ahead, you get a different view of the school than if you just show up. And what was so funny to me was visiting a school where parents would tell me, we can never reach the principal. The principal's just never there. They're blah, 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 blah. But as a board member, I would be in the building for 3 minutes. And all of a sudden I'd have a principal next to me. Hey, how's it going, Director Stewart? Hi, let's show you some stuff, whatever. How did I find the principal in 3 minutes? and anybody else coming in there would be told all day long that the principal is not available. Well, I saw a difference in principals. I saw some that did sit in their office with the door closed all day, some that were out of the building a lot most of the time, and some that were kind of like connected to the teachers. They were like a teacher themselves. And what I learned back then, people used to say to me, principals should be instructional leaders. They should know what they're talking about. They should know what they're doing. I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but I do know, as a person who visits schools, I visit a lot of schools, you get to see things physically. I did a visit in Nashville at a school where everybody who was giving me the tour was capable of teaching. So they took me into a couple of classrooms and they saw a couple of kids struggling with the different things or whatnot. And they bent down on their knee next to the kid and were able to give real instructional guidance and push forward. It wasn't BS. There were 3 people giving us a tour and they were different titles in the building. Everyone in the building knew how to teach. Right. Just like everybody at giving me the tour was able to bend down next to a kid and go, hey, so what's going on with this? Do you see how this is working? Blah, 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 blah. And it was like real teaching and it wasn't BS. And I was like, oh, see, that's real different than some of those other places where you're sitting in your office all day. And your teachers have issues and they need you to be taking care of some things. And you're like, not taking care of them. So, all right, well, let's move on to the next more explosive one. Cause this is the one where I'm going to pull out my old man hat. So just so y'all know, just so you know, but what's the truth about dealing with parents and dealing with the public? And I'll tell you one part of where this is coming from is I am hearing so much more from educators of how over parents they are right now. Now, I know what y'all are going to say to me. Y'all going to give me all that community, whatever, I don't know, relationships, and blah, blah, blah. And, I'm hearing some stories about what parents do and what parents are doing that is so out of pocket that that for the first time, I'm actually on the side of the teachers with something like this. I'm not like, I'm a parent advocate. So, but now with some of the stuff I'm hearing, I'm thinking to myself, honestly, Chris, what would you do if you were in that situation? And, I might just be, you might get told something you don't want to get told. But anyways, don't let me color this discussion. Y'all tell me what's the truth about being a teacher and your interactions with parents. And the real truth. Don't gloss it over, man.
And again, this was years ago when I was a teacher. I taught for 10 years, and that was between, early 90s, to, 2000s, and then, became administrator. But got to see a lot of great folks with parents. And it was, and again, I think I really had a skewed experience, man. You know what I mean? Like I would go to meetings with educators around the country, and they would lament like how they never see parents. Parents don't come to meetings. They can't get in touch with families. I've never experienced that. Like, you know what I mean? Like I've never experienced it. Like I remember a 7 to 12 building, and we would look at like what percentage of families came in like during report card conferences. You're talking about 70 something percent and above. And if we counted those who like could not make it but was engaged in some kind of way, email like, hey, I'm at work, but like, can I set up a meeting at next week for like, you know what I mean? Like everyone was in the 90s. Like and it wasn't just like at my last school, like every school. And came in there with that type of experience of like families being responsive. And so for me, the number of parents who like there was like actual real conflict was so minimal, because even the ones when there was a conflict, we knew the family like so in depth. Like it wasn't like, it was very few who we were just like, yo, this is not working, this type of relationship. You know what I mean? Like, and we never got to that just off of one thing. Like, you know what I mean? But there were some who were like, they would, maybe wanted to be their child's friend. You know what I mean? So you would see that. But, this is like parenting, period, right? Like we had teachers who were like that with their own kids or with their students, right? So some of this was just human nature. And I think for us, it was a level of empathy, understanding, and embedded in the community, right? Like, so we know when someone was struggling, we knew, who would, engage. Also knew which staff, like, the staff members like, oh, so-and-so, this parent, I was like, yeah, because you got grimy with her daughter and she's responding the way that, like I don't have a problem with how she's, the fire she's bringing, and you actually earned a little spiciness in the response, and yes, I'll be there to help, like mend the relationship, but you need to take ownership and accountability, right? Like, and so that was the type of community that I was raised in inside the school as a young teacher, as well as what I tried to foster with our leadership team, and generations are different, and we got to like understand how to how they
I mean, you
evolve.
got
We
some
got
young
younger
parents showing
families.
up now. Some young parents that are showing up different. Yeah, they're just different, and somebody should be honest about that, right? And someone, if I was a teacher, might get their
But some
feelings
of that
hurt.
is
But
like, all right, even if they're different, sometimes we can give people negative
Ish,
energy
what would you say about this?
in a way, right?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I was going to veggie back off of Sharif's statement about humans, right? Human nature. Like people are people, man. You're going to meet all types of people, students and in between in this career. But as a parent also, I'm also kind of an extra parent at times. So I understand, and I think it's the perception and also how parents are approached, because a lot of parents, specifically in the school district of Philadelphia, haven't had positive experiences at school themselves, let alone their children. So I know for me and my wife, we've had to go to bat several times and sit down and have meetings with these folks and be like, yo, you can't be doing this with our child, right? But then I've also had a parent who was a CPAC member and was upset that their child was not learning about Ben
What's
Carson,
CPAC? What's the
Conservative Political Action Committee.
Damn,
And
really?
so, yeah, so they try to get me investigated for like spreading hatred against white people. Obviously, the students, they interviewed all these students. I didn't even know that was going on. And when it gave it to me, he's like, I was surprised. Not one of the 20 students out of all your classes who we interviewed said anything negative about your class. And so like this one parent had the power enough to have me invest. Like, imagine if I, you know what I mean? But like the fact that I was tight on my own stuff and I wasn't going to teach about Ben Carson and all the good Negroes like they wanted me to teach, like I was able to hold my ground like that and still be able, even though eventually they were able to pull their child out of my class, because one of their children out of my class the next year because the child didn't want to do a project on an African country. That's a whole nother conversation. But like as a parent, I've been accused of making a teacher cry because she gave my son a pamphlet about Black History Month, nothing about Carter G. Woodson. I did find out Gerald Ford made it a month. And I wrote saying, oh, you know, like with all the Black children in front of you, I know several folks that do anti-racist pedagogy across the city I can refer to. Supposedly that teacher cried and still hates my guts to this day.
Bro, you did not want to give Gerald Ford credit for Black history. Like, shame on you. Like, what's the matter with you?
And it was first grade, all black class. And
They
so
should
like
be celebrating Gerald Ford, bro, in February.
Absolutely.
Matter of fact, I don't know why y'all talk
What
about
is wrong
anything
with you?
besides Gerald Ford in February.
See, this is what y'all do. Y'all just give these good white people a problem all the time. You just like
That's
try
what's
and
the
take
matter with this over woke stuff anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know, get all these good white people problems. What's wrong with you? So, anyways, as I do my Uncle Ruckus, I do know we got to move on because we got to wrap. So, we have talked about several things. We've talked about the truth about teacher prep. And I think the takeaway from that is it's not really prep. We've talked about teacher induction, you know, coming into teaching in the classroom. And I think where we landed on that is residency matters, like having some experience in teaching while you're learning is very important. And I think we all agreed
Coaching.
it should be free. It should be free. You know, that it should be free. Classroom management, I don't know where we netted out on, but all of these things I'm naming, I think are real important plot points if you wanted to tell somebody the truth about teaching. Classroom management, I think you guys said relationships are like the biggest kind of, I think the biggest good ingredient for, and also Ish, you said something that resonated with me a lot was the design of your room. The design of different behaviors happen for different things. I mean, I don't know how long ago it was that I saw something years ago that it was like police interrogations when they happen in a room where the walls are painted pink give you a different outcome than if the walls are painted white, for instance. And I never know what that meant, but for classrooms, it probably means doing some intentional stuff in your classroom makes a difference in behavior. We talked about the truth with administrators. And I think the net of that is you guys have both had good and bad experiences, or you have heard about both. You've had good experiences, but you've heard about the bad experiences. And I think, to be honest, to teachers who are already on the job and the others who might want to come into it, relationship with administrators might be a mixed bag. We can't predict which kind you're going to get when you get there. So you should be prepared probably to deal with different types of administrators, some that are going to be more supportive and know what they're talking about, and some who don't really, you have to wonder how they got the job, right? And then this last thing, dealing with parents, whatever, I just, I get what y'all saying and everything, but I just think some of y'all out of pocket right now as parents. And if I was your teacher,
listen,
you would get your
humanity
feelings
is
hurt.
out of pocket. Humanity, because the
Humanity's
parents
out of
could also
pocket.
say, you know what, some of these teachers are out of
This
pocket.
is true,
right? We see
It's true.
videos and stuff.
some of them are.
See some of these principals are out, but
Some of them
majority
are.
of folks, they want to do well. They want, and listen, life as a human being is not easy, right? Like, all the things all the pressures,
Nah,
sometimes get
bruh. Nah,
manifest in
bruh.
how we
There,
interact. And
there
listen,
ain't
I'm not
enough.
talking about I'm not talking about like the far,
Nah,
there's
bruh.
the extremes. Yes, there are some
Yes.
extremes that you see and
Hmm.
hear about. You're like, that is absolutely unacceptable. Absolutely.
There are
But
some schools where the extremes happen with more frequency
it's just,
than the
well,
others.
culture.
So
There's
it's
some.
so
Listen, I told you, my first day as a principal, at dismissal, this parent was storming up the street because she was about to jump on top of somebody else's kid,
yeah.
for something for bullying, right? And this was something that was the norm. This is the school I was the third principal in 6 months as well, right? But part of that, what I realized, like that pattern that I was seeing, there were so many families who felt like unheard, and that
Hmm.
their child
Hmm.
was unsafe, and that they felt like they had to take things in their own hands, and that no matter what, so they took that by any means necessary to mean like how I'm going to engage in this space. And we worked really diligently to build trust so that they wouldn't, that we didn't have that type of relationship in the community, as well, right? And so
Yeah.
again, it's
So,
deliberate. It's
anyways,
yeah.
y'all, when you hear this stuff from Sharif, it's always going to be a Disney version. So I'm going to always give you
Listen,
the other one. But before we, the last
it's
thing I wanted to end
it's
on,
the it's the black centered version, bro, not the Disney version. It is
okay, all right.
the
Well, it's the black
black
center version.
communal
Um,
version.
so that leads into the last thing that I'll say leads into something that's happening at the Center for Black Educator Development. But the thing I'm saying about teachers is right now, I think many parents, and it's not just the parents that you might imagine in your head as I'm saying these things, are being trained to be a nuisance now. Like the thing you just said,
Right.
Ish, about like the CPAC people,
Mhm.
wanting you investigated because you weren't teaching about Ben Carson, all that stuff. That's an epidemic right now. That's an
Yeah.
epidemic. Like parents are literally being
Teach
trained to
about Ben
fight
Carson.
everything. If there's not enough conservative content, fight it. And this whole thing about parents being weaponized to be nuisance is
Mhm.
to teachers.
Yeah.
Like to bird dog teachers. Teachers have
Mhm.
enough to do already. Some of y'all kids are bad, right? And you up in here like sending them email asking why they didn't teach your kid about Ben Carson. You better shut up. Your kid ain't even reading nothing, and you talking about why we ain't talking about Ben Carson or whatever. And if you want to come teach, come teach, right? But don't send a whole bunch of dumb emails that you got off of Fox News or somewhere else that told you that you should be fighting the schools all the time. You should be fighting the teacher all the time. You should go to the school board and just give it to them and blah, blah, but do nothing productive. Right? Do nothing productive. Now, if I'm an educator and I'm in that situation, and that's one thing we did not tell the truth about here today, that we should tell the truth of, because there's going to be a lot of educators listening to this that want the real truths told. And one of them is, as a teacher, you see my hat organized. Y'all know I've given teachers unions a lot of problems for a lot of years. You know that I'm
Mhm.
giving them a lot less of a problem now these days. But the reason that you have a situation like that is all these goddamn investigations that teachers get that on stupid shit constantly. I'm just going to be
Mhm.
real about it. If I were
Yeah.
doing the work,
Sorry.
this isn't just like some loose advocacy. If it was me, Chris Citizen Stewart, and I was getting investigated for dumb shit all the time, I would be happy to have somebody that whose job it was to help defend me against dumbness, to help me
Mhm.
defend me against those things. So if
Mhm.
you don't want to admit that those things happen, then you will never understand the need for collective bargaining, the collective power as a teacher and as an educator. So teachers getting investigated for dumb stuff constantly. It's happening every day.
Mhm.
People listening to this right now, if you're an educator, many of you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
And what's your defense mechanism? Because parents and the public and people in the public, it's not all gravy with them. Some of them are crazy, and they are
Mhm.
bird dogging your district for dumb reasons. And they're taking up administrative time. Like time is money,
And
and
resources. Yeah.
they are taking, yeah, they're taking up time and resources. I'm sorry, I'm on my soapbox. I'm just going to end with on this one part, but there's a district here in Minnesota that has a national group that includes somebody that Sharif, that you and I know, is in this national group. They are now just bringing lawsuits against school districts and asking them, for the school district here in Minnesota, they wanted everything about DEI, everything about Black students, programs helping Black students, all that stuff. And for the school district to produce what they needed produced to respond to the attorneys of this group would have cost them $1 million.
Mhm.
It was $1 million worth of document production to answer this one national stupid group's request and Freedom of Information Act, right? $1 million,
Which is
right?
also part of the design, right? You know what I mean?
Part of the
Like to get you
design.
to cower, to get you to pause, to get you to be fearful. You know, not only are they like, harassing you, but they're also like, hey, there's a cost, there's a financial cost. And at some point, when you're like, you know what, we just can't risk spending money to defend ourselves. So let's just not do any
Let's get rid of the
equity work.
DEI stuff. Yeah, let's get
Yeah.
rid of the equity, the inclusion stuff. All right, well,
Hmm.
listen, that leads into May 9th, which is Black Teacher Appreciation Day. The Center for Black Educator Development has something up on their social media feeds that is talking about next week. Next
Hmm.
May 9th, there's going to be Black Teacher Appreciation Day. Sharif, do you want to give us a brief on what that's about? It sounds a little racist to me, but anyways, go ahead. Tell us.
Well, you know what? It's pulling out like a
Yeah.
specific group of folks who've been just historically marginalized and not thought of. And, so this is part of Teacher Appreciation Week, but we also, even during this National Teacher Appreciation Week, which is everywhere, we celebrate dope teachers, we celebrate aspiring teachers, as well as the veterans who may have retired now and laid the groundwork. We also want to just call out the historic contributions of Black teachers, how they've helped shape the framework, instructional effectiveness, high expectations, and this is tied to the research of like a Black teacher and a white teacher can look at the same Black kid, and have two different expectations. But the Black teacher will also have those same high expectations for other children from different cultural backgrounds, right? And so calling out, a group of teachers who have not historically been spoken about when you think about educational theory, instructional practices. And so this is our attempt to just, we're celebrating a full week for all teachers, but we're also really highlighting Black teachers. We're also really proud to partner with the U.S. Department of Ed for the second year, and they'll host the Thank a Black Teacher convening on Tuesday as well in D.C. At the convening having a convening specifically highlighting the contributions, historic as well as contemporary contributions of Black teachers in the space. So shout out
Yeah, I appreciate
to dope
this.
Black teachers. Yeah, thank you.
And we could do a whole show. I think we should come back on this, do a whole show, because when you talk about, I was joking just now, but when you talk about Black teachers, you are talking about a unique contribution to public education, right? I
Hmm.
think people a lot of times think it's a seat, or we just need jobs, or we need a certain number, like it's a number. No, they bring something unique to the table that has makes statistical changes in the lives of children. Right.
Yeah.
So not only for Black children, if they have a series of Black teachers, that their stats become better, especially if they have more than one. If they have two in a row, their stats become better. But here's my favorite part. Actually, white kids do better in the classroom, oftentimes with a Black teacher too. Right. So we've
Exactly.
been saying for years it's good for Black kids, but white kids actually have positive outcomes when they have a Black teacher. Right. So there's a reason to appreciate those who are already doing it. And then there's a reason to do what Sharif, what you're doing, is try to get more people to get in the pipeline to do it, because you do add something unique. Appreciate y'all. Thank you so much. I learned so much in these discussions. For everybody listening and watching, this has been another episode of Freedom Friday. It is Friday and you are still not free, but I know that you are freer after this hour with Ish, Sharif, and me. We'll see you on the next show.